Our fabulous speaker, many of you have heard Marc Miller speak before. He is a frequent speaker not only at Launchpad and other job clubs, but sort of all over Austin, and these days all over different countries. He's an international, global speaker and a keynote speaker. He was on our board of directors for a very, very long time. He is now relocated to Mexico, and he comes back to Austin just every so often, and we are fortunate enough to have him speak. He has written a wonderful book on job hunting that was recently got an award, and yes, there we go. He is the founder of Career Pivot, which helps people in the second half of life design careers that they can grow into for the next 30 years. He authored a book called Repurpose Your Career, A Practical Guide for the Second Half of Life. That was published in 2017. It's in its second edition, second printing. He was honored to be on the nextavenue.org list of the top 50 influencers in aging for 2017. So you can follow him. He has a wonderful blog. He curates all kinds of wonderful articles that he sends to Launchpad. So you may know of him, even though you haven't followed him, but start following his blog, it'll be worth it. And he's going to be talking about ageism. And ageism is not just discrimination against older people. It's discrimination against anybody because of their age. Young people also often face ageism because people don't believe that they have the years of experience to do a job. So they also get discriminated against. I don't think we have too many of those folks in this group, but keep in mind that it works on both sides. So Marc Miller.
I came back. We have been living for almost the last year in Ageism, Mexico. We have actually spent about 9 months down there. By the way, we moved down there because we got priced out of the health insurance market. I think almost everybody here can relate. We spent $25,000 in 2017 on health insurance and health care and did not reach our deductible. So my wife retired. She's 64. I am 62. And we kind of said, screw it. My wife has always been uninsurable until the Affordable Care Act, which allowed me to leave my last company, which was in 2011. I was with a high-definition digital conferencing startup. I worked for a sociopath, and I said, I'm not doing that. So I started Career Pivot. And over the last 2 or 3 months, I've started doing a series in research on ageism. Because everyone complains, I'm being discriminated because of my age. And so this is the first blog post. And by the way, the last couple of days I took a whole bunch of notes. I had a piece of paper, and I left it at home. So I have they all came from these 2 blog posts. So I'm just going to go with the 2 blog posts and we'll figure it out from there. But, and part of this is also from, and I'm going to kind of play here, is, from this TED Talk by Ashton Hathaway. It's a great TED Talk. Her book, This Chair Rocks, just came out this last week. I interviewed her on my podcast. If you listen to podcasts, go back to Repurpose Your Career. It's a great concept. She is promoting a movement because, well, and the way I originally thought I was going to do this, I was going to do this big PowerPoint presentation, and then I went, nah. As most people who've seen me, now who's seen me before presenting? Oh, we have lots of people. I've been accused, I've lived in Austin for 40 years, and I've been accused of knowing everybody in Austin, which I can't do because there are 150 people moving here every day. But I just had one of those moments where I lost my train of thought. But I rather than doing a PowerPoint, I thought I would do this as a discussion, right? I've experienced ageism. I have other people. In fact, I recently had a young man who wanted to be a guest on my podcast. He's a 30-something who he was really trying to pitch me to be on my podcast. Yeah. And he pitched all these ideas. I didn't like any of them. Finally, he says, "Yeah, well, I've experienced ageism." Well, tell me. He says, "I was working at this company. I was doing a great job. I was doing all the right things. I was performing above. My metrics were wonderful. And when it came up for a promotion, they said, now we're going to give it to this other guy because we don't think you have enough experience." Now, who had that happen sometime in their career? Is that new? No. The difference was, by the way, he quit the company. When that happened to us, we sucked it up. Now, was that the right thing to do? Most of the time, not. But we did. And what we're going to see as we go through the discussion is ageism has been around not as long as we think. It's a relatively new phenomenon, but, by the way, I will readily admit right here, I'm an ageist. Okay? We all have our biases. And the place that we want to get to, that Ashton promotes, is the first place when you start combating ageism is right here. Okay, so what is ageism? Who wants to give me a definition?
Discrimination because of age.
Discrimination based on age. Everyone agree with that? Now, is it just discrimination against us old folks?
No.
Yeah.
I think ageism is also where you find someone that's going to be appropriately aged for their job. Someone that is in a position where their age is an asset.
I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to tell you it's where their experience is an asset, which doesn't necessarily come with age.
Well, would you want someone with 25 years of experience to be your receptionist? The one that's walking in off the street to meet you for the first time?
If they can do the job, because one of the things we're going to see with a lot of us who are in our 60s and 70s is when it comes down to, there's a certain point in time where, you know what, I don't want to work so hard anymore. One of my mantras. Yeah. Well, one of my mantras is when almost all of us went off to work and started our careers, we became actors. We play roles. And what happens is, after a period of time, you don't even know that you're playing that role. It becomes part of you. You're in character so long. Yes?
So here's my great quote. Ronald Reagan, during the day, I will make my use and experience part of it. With Wanda said he lost right then.
So one of the things, you look at me, I mean, because I did this, and what happens is, when I hit my 50s, staying in character became exhausting. Believe it or not, I am a big-time introvert. Anybody who knows me, I can work a room with the absolute best. I was a geek that could speak for IBM. I've been through 2 successful startups as a trainer and a presenter. By the way, when I'm done here today, I'm going to go. Right? I'm exhausted. Now, do I like being up here? Yes. It's fun. I'm really good at it. I don't get energy from that. So I've developed a set of skills that, by the way, I've got all this years of experience. When I left high technology, I left tech, and one of the things my business coach beat into me is, what do you want to leave behind? And there are times when we reach this point, I may have 25 years experience, but I don't do that stuff. if I have to inhale one more high-tech technology, my last company wanted me to develop training around video protocols going through firewalls. Could I do it? Yes. So, what we're seeing here is ageism is something that is prevalent through our society. Now, I'll use the example. My father, in 1978, was 58 years old. He was an economist in the New York Stock Exchange. He was kicked out. He was essentially fired, told to go retire. By the way, that killed him. It took 15 years. Now, the key piece there was, that was 1978. When was the term ageism coined? Anybody have any idea?
27.
1969. It's relatively new. Now, why is that? Well, if I look at it, I've got a great little video in here. I've got a great little video from Sun City. Sun City opened on January 1, 1960. There was a great visionary, Dale Webb. Okay? Now, he opened it with 5 model homes and a strip mall. Again, January 1, 1960. He had 10,000 cars outside of his door on day 1. So, how many of those 10,000 cars, presuming everyone had 2 people in it, how many of those folks do you think smoked? Right? Probably all of them, at least, right? They didn't live very long. Today, if you're a married couple, 65, I don't know what, I have a New York life buddy who told me that something like it's 70 or 80% of one of you will live to 100. We're going to live really long. So the concept of ageism is relatively new. And that's the important thing to get through, is the fact that this is not something that we have. So it's all about attitudes. Because one of the things I talk about here is why is this a problem now that we didn't see it in our parents' generation? Reality is, we live longer. Put it bluntly, most of us are going to work into our 70s. Okay? And it's not because we need, didn't you know at 65 you're supposed to retire? Doesn't everybody know that you're going to retire at 65? No. Why will a lot of us not retire at 65?
Money.
What was that? Money? Okay, the other piece is, there are people like me. I'm not rich. We have enough money to retire. I don't want to retire. I mean, I've been in Mexico for the last year, and there was a couple that was they were playing cards and ended up. And by the way, being in Acapulco is like being in a college town. Everyone has moved there and doesn't know anybody, so everyone's super friendly, and it's not uncommon to walk into a restaurant and start talking to the next table. Right? It's very common. So this next table, the woman turns out she was 70, her friend was 62, and they just went, wow, we just love the activities here. And my visceral response was, I don't want activities, I want meaning. So we got those of us who either want to keep on working, or you have to keep on working. Now, I was on a panel discussion about a year and a half ago, and the other gentleman on the panel was a guy from New Zealand. And New Zealand has the interesting problem of the kids, when they graduate from college, leave the island. So So his job was to help companies keep their older employees. And what he said has stuck with me to this day. And I've done a blog post on this. And he says, if you plan on working into your 70s, you need to plan that in your 50s. Because, by the way, it's probably not full-time employment. It is probably not a job. It is probably something, a portfolio. It is probably doing some freelancing. It may be a whole collection of things, which for many of us is really foreign. Because one of the things I claim as a 62-year-old, I was raised to be an employee, to go work for a father-like company. That was going to take care of me. Why I went to work for IBM when I graduated from college. And by the way, I was going to work there for 30 or 40 years, and I would ride off into the sunset, right, and retire with my pension. Right? That's what I was raised to do. And then they moved my cheese. Right? So the point here is, ageism is a problem today, and the concept here is, everything has changed. And I know a lot of you are pursuing traditional jobs. I'll use the example, I've got somebody in my online community right now who's 68. He's always been employed full-time. He was an association executive for a real estate association who drove him nuts. He was ex-military and spent most of his career in state and local government. He is now working as a small business development center advisor. He does that 3 to 4 days a week. He is teaching one class at his local university, and he's going to start his consulting business. Now, he's probably going to work a whole lot harder, make less money, and by having more fun. For many of us, that's a really, really foreign concept. Can you put that up? Sure. So, who's it? We've all experienced probably ageism in the job market. Who's experienced ageism outside of the job market?
Well, when I started college a long time ago, but I started at 17, and I was discriminated against by my peers because I wasn't even an adult yet. So,
And probably a lot of your peers were male?
Yeah.
Well, the male brain doesn't finish developing until 25, and as a female, you were probably a whole lot more mature than they were.
Well, when I graduated, I still was lucky kid, so I actually got to take classes so that people would take me more seriously than they all thought I was in high school.
Good example. Who else has experienced ageism?
Grad school 3 years ago.
Grad school 3 years ago. Tell me about that.
I am in my 50s and went back to school and I'm working in high tech, so looking at user research and stuff, and I had never encountered ageism until I was there. And some of the younger students in their mid-20s just discounted me very quickly, especially if I didn't pick up on a piece of technology that was effortless for them. And they did not understand the additional wisdom that I brought from other areas. And so that was kind of a shock.
Grad school 3 years ago, I was at UT working, studying UX research. I was working with some students in their mid-20s. There was a piece of technology that they picked up very quickly. It took me a little longer because my introduction to technology back in the 80s was when you delete something, it's gone for good, as opposed to recoverable like it is, a lot of it is now. So I tend to be a little more cautious working through learning new technologies. Because of that, they discounted my ability to be effective on the team. Not all of them, just a couple, but they negated the wisdom that I brought from life experience that I had, and it was a shocker because I'd never experienced ageism before.
Yeah, who else experienced ageism? Outside of the job market.
I seem not too old, I'm only 39, but I was in a panel interview with Charles Schwab, actually is my dream company, and there was all the people there interviewing with me was out of college, and I have 16 years in banking. So I felt like I was lost because I was like, I have the experience, but I didn't have the college, and all the others, all the other candidates was just out of college with tons of MBAs and degrees. So I felt like a little lost there. And
But did they say something specifically?
not really. It's just how do I felt it.
I'll give you one general comment. If you have a problem with a cell phone, iPhone, anything like that, you walk up to any 15-year-old and ask them how to fix it, and it's done.
Or even an 8-year-old.
How long do you want to keep?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Brian.
Just a quick one. In acting, they say explicitly in the audition details, that the age ranges that they're looking for. If you're really good with makeup, you may be able to get past that, but typically not. So that's, it's pretty much blatant age discrimination.
Cool. Okay, let's move on.
Move on.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You got one more.
When you are having, you want your children or your young people to help you with something, they won't show you how to do it, they'll just do it, and they don't want to take the time to really teach you because you'll be slow.
Cool. So one of the things, the next thing I want to go on to is how do we identify ageism in the workplace? And I'm going to give you some examples because sometimes it's pretty subtle. So I'll use the example at my last tech startup. I was significantly older than most everybody there. My boss was probably 20 years my junior. And I decided to grow a very, very well-groomed mustache. It came in great. And by the way, I went off and taught high school math in the early 2004 to 2006. For those who don't know, I had a near fatal bicycle accident in 2002. I hit a car head-on 50 miles an hour. I totaled a 96 Toyota Corolla with my body and my bicycle. And I lived. I tore up a knee, I broke a hip, I dislocated a shoulder, broke a bunch of ribs, broke the clavicle. I had imprints of the pads of the helmet in my head, but I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to. I spent 5 days in the Brack Trauma Center. They had me walking on crutches in 3 days. I was back on a bike in 10 weeks. I was flying back to China in 4 months. Oh, by the way, I flew right smack in the middle of the SARS epidemic in Guangdong province. That is what I refer to as my WTF moment. Because my first tech startup, we didn't get rich, but we got debt free. And we paid off our son's college education. He headed off to college. We were an empty nester. The mortgage was paid off. And I'm going, why the hell am I doing this? So I went up to high school math, and the first Christmas I was teaching Algebra 1, Algebra 2. And I noticed that a lot of the other teachers were growing goatees, so I grew one. And it came in great. So immediately I walk in the first day after the new year, and 2 of my freshman girls come running up to me going, Mr. Miller, you grew a beard. I said, yeah. You gonna color it? I went, no. Well, it's gray. I said, well, I'm old. Then immediately, later that day, I had 2 of my freshman boys come up to me. Mr. Miller, you grew a beard. I said, yeah. How'd you grow it so fast? I went, I'm old. As we all know, the older you get, the faster it grows, and it grows in places that you don't want it to grow. So I grew the mustache, and I walked into the room. I had just come back to Australia, and there I have my boss and another colleague sitting in the corner snickering. Now, I was kind of offended by it, but that's a classic case of age discrimination. That's it. Seeing a pattern of hiring, and by the way, this list comes from a very good article that if you Google Ageism, you'll find it's called 11 Ways to Identify Age Discrimination, written by a law firm. The second one is seeing a pattern hiring only younger employees. By the way, IBM has done this big time, and there are legal suits against them. Back in 1999, they took away, my pension was yanked away from me. And then they suddenly realized, oh, all these guys over 40, they're going to sue us for ageism and age discrimination. Then they give us our pensions back. I then gave them the single finger salute and left. Because I didn't trust them. Which, as it turned out, I would have had 30 years in 2008, which is when IBM discontinued funding the pension. But by the way, I wouldn't have made it that long. The guy who replaced me actually was a Launchpad member, because in 2004, he got laid off, and he was better at marketing than I was. So I wouldn't have lasted. The other ones, hearing age-related remarks, getting turned down for a promotion. I had a good friend at my last startup, Life Size, who, when he worked at IBM, he kept on getting passed over and passed over and passed over, and he finally got someone to tell him, why am I not getting promoted? And what they told him was, oh, you don't have enough career runway. Well, you're going to retire. Why invest in you? Things like being overlooked for challenging, being isolated. Well, we currently have one woman in my online community who's basically being told, when are you going to retire? Having your position eliminated, experiencing layoffs, which you all have. One of the, we've seen this with a number of folks, suddenly getting a PIP, performance improvement plan. But the one of them I want to tell you about is at my last company, I was trying to hire a technical trainer. My boss, my sociopath, inserted somebody over me, in between us, in the very end of the process of where I was going to make an offer. And I had two folks. I brought both of them in to make a presentation, and I chose the one. He had to be probably a year or two my junior, so he was probably in his mid-50s. And his response was, I don't want to hire him. I don't think he has the energy. Now, this comes back to, you may remember Charles Black. Yes. Charles Black is a recruiter here in town, and he came in, and I love Charles. He came in and talked about the fact that he had gone out and interviewed at Microsoft. This is back in the 90s. He had interviewed a whole day. They really liked him. They actually asked him to stay an extra day so he could interview with the top executive. And he went almost a whole second day, and he asked the executive at the very end of the day, do you have any concerns? And she told him, we're just not sure you have the energy. It wasn't until he got on the plane that he went, that says I'm old. Okay? What I should have done with my boss was say, Did I do that? No, because I didn't pick it up as being ageist. Just like with Charles, it took a while for the going, he was called how old? So one of the things is getting ourselves more attuned to how we respond. The other thing I want to talk about is, I said, I'm an ageist. So how does that come out? Who's talked about senior moments? That's an ageist comment, right? I use the comment that I suffer from CRS. right? Can't remember stuff? Yeah, we gotta keep it clean. Well, Kathy can tell you, my presentation language is a lot cleaner than it used to be. The point here is, one of the places that we need to start is with ourselves. Ashton Applewhite in her article she talks about the fact, geez, we didn't say when we were 16 and couldn't find our keys that we were having a junior moment. We all forget stuff. By the way, we forget stuff more frequently as we get older. But one of the things, if you'll pick up her book, which I have a review on my website, is she talks about, by the way, we may not remember, we may not process stuff as fast, but by the way, we make a whole lot less mistakes. One of the things that we do that our juniors do not do is when we are interacting with people, we'll actually remember those interactions. One of the things we now see with the kids, and by the way, anybody who's old enough to be my kid, I am old enough to be the father of the kid, one of the challenges is they don't memorize stuff anymore. Their educational system is built on, so they don't do the memorization, and they're not developing some of the same synapses and pathways up here. I have a very good friend who we were posting stuff on LinkedIn, and she talked about the fact that she sees particularly younger employees who are in customer relations positions and customer interactions. They won't remember that they had this certain interaction that didn't work and learn from it. Because one of the things that is said, I can tell you the capital of Illinois, Springfield, right? Because I memorized it whenever. So the kids don't have to. So.
You know what they remember? They remember song lyrics.
Okay.
But not school related.
Yes. Well, yeah. Yes. One of the things by the way, I came back this time because I did my multi-generational workshop for the Texas Health Insurance Exchange up at Lakeway. And one of the things I talk about whenever I talk about generational, they're not homogeneous. But one of the common themes among our younger employees is they aren't required to memorize stuff because they can always look it up. It is always readily available here. Right? So, how many of you now believe your ages? Every hand should go up because we all are ages. So one of the things that we all need to do is learn to, number one, I've been working really hard at this over the last month, is cut the crap out of my language. I don't say CRS anymore. I don't have senior moments. Part of this is learning how to change our behaviors and how I treat people. It's rather interesting. I had a discussion with Ashton on the podcast. Living in Mexico right now, where the multi-generational family is common. It is very, very common for us to see some, walk out my front door, and I only live a block from the plaza in Ocoee, is to see grandma taking her kids to school. And she probably lives with them. Similarly, the one day we were walking up to one of the trailheads on a Saturday morning, and there was a very sweet-looking 5-year-old girl who was walking hand in hand with probably her 3 to 4-year-old brother, walking by themselves, And we're going, what's going to happen to them? And they're probably walking to grandma on a Saturday morning. So the whole idea here is changing our own behaviors. And, oh, I know it. Ashton talked about the fact that one of the reasons that ageism is much more common today is we now are segregated, right? We are segregated by age. We now have daycare. I didn't go to daycare. I went to nursery school at the church when I was really young, but most of us didn't grow up in daycare. We really didn't have nursing homes, right? Most people aged in place. And by the way, we didn't live all that long either. So one of the other pieces is looking at ageism because it is society naturally segregates ourselves. So one of the things I've found in a couple of different articles is what can you do to not experience ageism, and two, what can you do to prevent it? One, how many of you hang out with millennials? I suggest you start learning how to do that. You will.
Then you're going to get more proficient at texting because
Yeah.
they don't talk to each other.
Okay.
My son and his girlfriend had an argument the other night and they were in separate rooms. Are you texting Caleb? It's just we're having an argument.
Okay. This is an important point. In my multi-generational workshop, I talk about that each generation has its natural communication style. Okay. My parents' generation, they wrote letters in cursive, right? Don't hand a cursive written letter to a young person because they can't read it. But if I look at my generation, we're an auditory generation. We like to be talked to. When we went to college, who remembers 2 rings and hang up? Right? We call. When we got to the Gen X, they were the first ones with email, and the kids now text. Number one, if I want you to listen to me, I have to adapt to you. So I did my multi-generational workshop for a nationwide staffing agency, a bunch of franchises all over the country. And I showed up the day before in Tampa, Florida, and they were all texting their kids. So when I got in there, we got to the point of communications, I started talking about, okay, how many of you text your kids? And there were 150 people in the room. Almost everything went up. Okay. You modified your communication skills, you modified your communication techniques for your kids. Are you willing to do it for your younger employees? And I just left it at that. And you could feel it go through the room. Oh, crap, he's right. So one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do is hang out with millennials. Learn how to communicate with them. Because by the way, over the next 15 years, they are going to take over. Okay? And in my opinion, it will be for the good. The second thing is, who is focused on upgrading their skills? Your employer no longer will do that for you. They will not do it. This is a big problem in the current job market. There are skill shortages. But since 2007, the amount of investment in skill development for companies' employees has gone thump. Why? Because the assumption is if they train you, you will leave. Well, but they're not going to invest because they're not going to believe you. Yep. So the point here is skill, and by the way, in my opinion, one of the best ways you can do this is podcasts. To a large extent, they're free. I consume podcasts like crazy. I don't watch TV anymore. Of course, being in Mexico, although I can get US TV there, we don't do that. I listen to podcasts.
Another way to meet them. I mean, they're often.
Yes.
Want to get out and talk to people about what you do or what you like to do.
Yep.
It's great learning.
Brian talks about meetups, and I'll just finish on the podcast piece. The reason why I like podcasts is the fact that I can do it for workout, I can do it while I'm walking, I can do it while I'm cooking dinner. I can consume information at times in which I wouldn't do anything else. So I'm kind of making this stuff as I go along because what haven't I covered?
The mass amounts of information streams that go through and how do you keep up with that and still stay focused on work. For me, that's a challenge. They're all big like Slack and, you know, all these different inter-office constant communications that attention switching thing. They call it multitasking, but it's really attention switching, which is disrupting your actual work activity.
Yes.
And they're so engrossed in that, which is, you know, the next step beyond texting is this multi-stream.
Well, one of the things that depending, I'm a Berkman consultant, I use the Berkman assessment. I am what Berkman refers to as very low change, which means is don't interrupt me, don't screw my schedule. So one of the things that I have to do is when I'm going to focus, I'm going to work on something, I have to eliminate all distractions. So one of the things I've done with clients in the past is I've had them turn off the automatic download network. It's called bright shiny object syndrome. Right? I turn this sucker off. I get it away from me. One of my biggest things is, turn Slack off. If you're going to have to concentrate, right? One of the things one of my challenges that I work from home is I'll be deep in concentration and my wife walks in and interrupts me.
And then she accuses you of being insensitive.
Yes. So the point there is I know I have to do things to protect myself. And so if that's a problem for you.
Well, it's more how do you adjust into the environment with the millennials who are constantly doing this and then needing that deep thought time and trying to segregate that off.
So let me use an example. I worked with a product manager from my last startup. When he got laid off. And before he got laid off, what he would do, because they worked in an open office, what he would do is in the mornings, he would walk in, be in the open office, and then do all the mundane things he had to do, answering emails, things that he could just. But when he had to do some concentration, he found a meeting room. And he did it very, very strategically. If that's an issue, you're going to have to figure that out. Similarly, I worked with one woman who she was drawn to a job that she was going to get a VP of marketing for a small advertising firm, and she was going to be in an open office. She wouldn't last. And she turned it down. She had turned it down. I can't function in an open office. I know if someone offered me a job, which I'm not taking another job ever again, if someone offers me a job in an open office, my answer is no. I can't do it. But that's knowing who I am.
Noise canceling headphones.
I
was just in an open office, it was cavernous, concrete, steel. Hey, let's turn on some music, and there's like people chattering, blah, 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 music going. Just get yourself some noise canceling headphones.
And for some people that works.
Right.
In fact, for a lot of people it works, but it's not everybody. Yeah.
So, just going back to the attention switching stuff, So when I have that issue, I know that all of those millennials are watching it and they're keeping track of it. And so my question to them is, hey, what happened on whatever that slash or whatever it was? You know how I am. I get focused and I miss stuff. So can you kind of distill it for me? And then now you have a conversation with millennials about stuff that went on. And 90% of it is, I look at it as like a Twitter feed. 90% of it is, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, that's okay. But did you actually complete a task? That's what I want to know as far as, management. Did you actually complete a task or just talk about it? We talked about it, how to do that. And then you get 5 minutes, everything you missed in the 3 hours where they were engaged.
One of the things you can do with the millennials, this happens in my multi-generational workshop all the time. I get these millennials after they've gone through it. They all walk up to me and say, you know what, I'm going to stop texting mom. I'm going to call her from now on. Because I always tell them, if you have an older boss, go talk to them. Don't text them. So one of the things I'm going to encourage all of you is start adjusting your communication styles as to who you are speaking with and who you want to communicate with. If I want to get a hold of a younger recruiter, I'm going to text them. I'm not going to call them. If I can get the number, text, and get comfortable with that.
If you're using voice text, just proof it because Natasha might turn out as Natasha on your text.
Well, it's funny. There's a woman who helps run A-list staffing, Trish Atwater. One time, when she left me a message, it was transcribed by Google Voice. It came out as stressed out waters. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned that you rely a lot on podcasts. How do you source them? What are your main sources?
Mostly is I find one I like, then I will start looking through iTunes, the other ones recommended, or there will be a guest on a podcast, or other people will say, well, if you listen to this one, you ought to listen to this one. It's no different than anything else. How do you find good books?
Right, but are you going through YouTube, mostly iTunes?
It's iTunes. I'm an Apple user, so iTunes. By the way, 60-70% of all podcasts are listened to on iPhones. Although it's interesting, my podcast is in the top third of all podcasts. I get about 8,000 downloads a month. Almost 40% of all my listeners listen to on the computer, which is super high. Because the average population is probably 5%. And is anyone really sick of having all these telemarketers call you and have your phone ring every time? Oh, anyway.
I just wanted to comment on texting again. I've heard it said by several of my contemporaries that if someone's texting, if they don't want to listen, they don't want to talk to you, they don't want.
Okay, number one, particularly if they're younger, more importantly, they don't need to talk to you. Voicemails. Okay? Don't leave a voicemail for young. They won't listen to it. But they will call you back. I taught my wife to text me and not leave me, because she'd leave me these 3-minute voicemails and she wouldn't get to her point until the last 15 seconds. It drives me nuts. If she texts me, she gets to her point. The point here is, don't interpret the fact that they're texting you as something bad. That is what I call MSU disorder. Make stuff up. What you're going to find for many of you in your job search you are going to suffer from MSU. Oh, the recruiter didn't call me back. I must not have gotten the job. Or, so-and-so said this and therefore they really meant. And my response always the time is, and how do you know that? Really do your best to stop making stuff up. One of the key things, so for example, I had a client, former CEO, who she was deep in the interview process with an association, and everything stopped. And she says, I must not have gotten the job. By the way, she did. But she caused herself tons of stress. I said, call the recruiter. Well, I don't want to be intrusive. Call GD recruiter. The recruiter went off and had a family issue and disappeared for a short while. In other words, she made stuff up and caused stress. This is particularly true when you start implementing your own values on the younger generation. So that's one of the things I'm going to encourage you. Find places where you can interact and learn how to communicate with them.
I used to call a recruiter. I had this application process where they had me watch a video about all the core values and take a test on that. If I passed the test, the recruiter would get back to me. Yeah. They got back to me. Now they want me to put a video together about myself. Yeah. And you I don't know the recruiters. Okay. I can do a video. It's just.
And that's using the tools to figure that out. That might be calling somebody at the company, contacting somebody at the company and saying, okay, who's the recruiter? One of the things I always do is I will reach out to a recruiter via LinkedIn, send them a connection request, and then say, oh, by the way, could you accept this connection? And by the way, do you know who is handling this job? And, right? And just pick, and what you can do, if you ever listen to Gary O'Neill, Gary will tell you, when you pursue a company, you should connect with every recruiter at the company.
Right now, I don't know who the recruiter is.
Right. Then just pick one. Start connecting with recruiters. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe you'll find something else.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you have to remember with recruiters are typically really nice people. They are people. In this market, I know from talking with Gary, many of his recruiters are handling 40 and 50 recs at a time. They don't have time. They often are running on tight deadlines, and yes, they're stressed out.